It's Christmas Eve. The world is blanketed in soft snow, and all is calm. Inside a beautiful family cabin nestled deep in the Wasatch Mountains of Utah, the scent of pine fills the air. A large Christmas tree stands proudly in the corner, adorned with twinkling lights and shimmering ornaments. The scent of cinnamon and gingerbread drifts from the kitchen, where laughter fills the air. A perfect holiday retreat, surrounded by the untouched beauty of nature, far from the noise of everyday life. For the Kia family, this cabin was more than just a vacation home. It was their sanctuary, tedious tranquility, a place to escape the stresses of the world and reconnect as a family. Every Christmas, they came together here to make memories that would last a lifetime. It was a place of comfort, love, and warmth. It was where they could feel safe. But on December 22, 1990, everything changed. That picture-perfect holiday was about to be shattered in the most brutal way possible. What was meant to be a peaceful Christmas would soon turn into a nightmare that no one could have ever predicted. Two men, Taylor and Ed Deli, had been watching the Kias for days. Cold, calculating criminals who had been planning this moment for weeks. They weren't just looking to rob the family, they were looking to destroy it. They had chosen this isolated cabin, knowing it would be the perfect target. No one could hear the Kia's cries for help. No one could intervene. For Taylor and Deli, it was the perfect crime scene. As the Kia family arrived, expecting a joyful holiday celebration, Taylor and Ed Deli were already inside, waiting in the shadows, quiet, poised, and ready to strike. But what made this robbery even more chilling wasn't just the violence. It wasn't just the guns or the bloodshed. It was the cold, indifferent way these men carried out their plan. Their actions were as calculating as they were terrifying, and as the family would soon find out, this was no ordinary robbery. This was a nightmare that would test their will to survive and their capacity to fight back against the darkest of human intentions. In the next few minutes, we'll take you into the twisted minds of these criminals, show you how they set their trap, and reveal just how far they were willing to go to destroy a family's most precious memories. Get ready for a story that will leave you questioning how far evil can truly go, and how even in the darkest moments, there's still a spark of humanity that refuses to be extinguished. This is the story of the Kia family's Christmas turned deadly. It was the kind of winter afternoon that felt almost too perfect. The snow was falling gently outside the cabin, covering the world in a soft, white blanket. Inside, the warmth of the fire crackled, casting a golden glow on the cozy interior. The air was thick with the familiar scent of pine and cinnamon. Christmas was in full swing. The Kia family had arrived at their beloved cabin, eager to celebrate the holidays in their favorite retreat. The cabin itself was a picture of serenity. Tucked away deep in the Wasatch Mountains, it was a true escape from the world, a place where time seemed to slow down. The outside world couldn't reach them here. The isolation, the peace, the quiet, it was their sanctuary, a place where they could reconnect, laugh, and simply enjoy each other's company without any distractions. They dubbed it tedious tranquility, a name that reflected not only the cabin's stillness but the deep sense of peace it offered. Lena, just 16 years old, felt a sense of excitement building in her chest as she stepped into the cabin, shaking the snow from her boots. She and her younger sister, who was still full of energy and excitement at the thought of Christmas morning, were ready to dive into the holiday traditions they cherished. Their mother hummed a Christmas carol softly as she adjusted the ornaments on the tree, carefully arranging the last few gifts underneath, while their father smiled at the scene, content and proud. They were together, happy and safe in this perfect moment. It was a Christmas scene that could have come straight from a holiday postcard. The tree stood tall in the corner, its lights twinkling in time with the quiet rhythm of the storm outside. The scent of freshly baked cookies filled the cabin, and the sound of light-hearted conversation mixed with laughter. It was the kind of family gathering that people dream about. The kind of night that felt as though it would last forever, if only it could. Lena watched her mother laugh as their father set up the stockings by the fireplace, their younger sister tugging on her sleeve with questions about when Santa would arrive. The soft glow of the fire made everything seem even more magical. It was a perfect moment. And in that perfect moment, Lena felt the deep warmth of being surrounded by the people she loved the most. For the Kia family, tedious tranquility was more than just a cabin. It was the heart of their Christmas celebrations, a place to be together, to enjoy the little things that made the holiday season special. There were no distractions here, no pressures of the outside world, just the pure joy of being with the ones they loved most. But as Lena looked out the window, her gaze was drawn toward the dense forest surrounding the cabin. The snow, falling thick and fast, seemed to wrap the world in a muffled silence. The evening sky, darkened with the weight of the storm, added to the peaceful stillness. But something in the air felt different, almost heavy, as though the world was holding its breath. The Kias were about to have their perfect holiday, and yet, just outside their cabin, hidden in the shadows of the pines, something darker was waiting. Taylor and Ed Deli weren't just ordinary criminals. They were men hardened by a system that had chewed them up and spit them back out, twice. They knew the streets, the underworld, the desperate places where people did anything to survive. The world had given them nothing, and in return, they gave it nothing but violence. Taylor had grown up in a broken home, bouncing from foster care to foster care, never truly finding a place to belong. His criminal record stretched back to his teenage years, with convictions for theft, assault, and even aggravated burglary. He'd served time in juvenile detention, then later in the state penitentiary. By the time he was in his mid-20s, Taylor had already accumulated a disturbing list of offenses. He was quick to resort to violence, with little regard for the consequences. His past had made him callous, numbing him to the idea of empathy. In his eyes, the world owed him something, and he wasn't afraid to take it. Ed Deli was cut from the same cloth. Deli had never been a stranger to trouble, either. His crimes were different in nature, but just as dangerous. Arrested multiple times for arson, Deli had a habit of burning bridges, sometimes literally. His life had been a series of reckless, impulsive decisions, fueled by a deep-rooted anger and a need for control. He'd spent time in and out of correctional facilities, his record marked by repeated offenses, his rage growing stronger with each year he spent behind bars. In prison, they'd met. And together, they formed a partnership that would prove to be both ruthless and calculating. Together, they fed off each other's anger and desperation, plotting their next move, always looking for their next target. They had no moral compass, no concern for the people they harmed, no thought for the pain they caused. They lived in a world where survival meant taking whatever they wanted, by force, if necessary. It wasn't just about the money for Taylor and Deli. No, this was about control, power, the thrill of taking something that didn't belong to them. They saw themselves as predators, and their prey was anyone who stood in their way. But they didn't just target anyone. They were smart, strategic. They didn't want to be caught. They needed to make the crime as clean as possible. They needed the perfect location, the perfect family to disrupt, the perfect scene to play out their twisted fantasy. So, when Taylor had heard about the Kia family cabin, tucked deep in the Wasatch Mountains, he saw an opportunity. A place so secluded, so isolated, that the family would be at their mercy. He and Deli had scouted the area for days, watching the cabin from afar, learning the family's routines. They knew exactly when the Kias would arrive, when they would be most vulnerable. It was the perfect location. No neighbors for miles, no one to hear the screams. The snowstorms made it even easier. The roads were impassable, and the snowmobiles were the only way to reach the cabin. Taylor and Deli had already figured out how they would deal with that. They would be waiting for them, hiding in plain sight. They waited. Patiently. Almost too patiently. Watching as the Kias made their way up the mountain. They knew the family would be there soon, with the weight of the holiday cheer on their shoulders. They knew the family would be full of hope, excitement, unaware that everything they cherished was about to be taken from them. The robbers didn't just show up. They didn't simply break in and steal whatever they could find. No. This was about more than that. It wasn't just a robbery. It was a carefully orchestrated attack designed to break the family, to steal not just their possessions, but their peace, their safety, their sense of security. The isolation of the cabin gave Taylor and Deli an advantage, but their meticulous planning was what truly set them apart. They were calculating, deliberate. They knew exactly what they needed to do to keep the Kias under their control. They didn't plan to rush this. They would wait until the family was there, relaxed, comfortable, when they would least expect it. They would break in when the time was right, take control of the situation, and make sure the family would never feel safe again. Taylor had made sure to bring weapons, guns that would intimidate, knives that would threaten. But there was something else, too. Something darker. They had a plan. They would rob the Kias, yes, but it wasn't just about stealing their things. They wanted to crush the family's spirit, make them feel hopeless, make them understand that there was no escape, that nothing they did would stop what was coming. Taylor and Deli weren't just robbers, they were destroyers. They wanted to break the family's sense of security. They wanted to strip them of their peace, to leave them trembling and fearful. They didn't know yet that the Kias wouldn't simply give up. They had no idea that they were about to face a fight for their lives that would shake them to the core. As they waited for the family to arrive, Taylor and Ed Deli rehearsed the plan in their heads. They knew what needed to happen, how they would force the Kias into submission, how they would take control. And yet, there was something they hadn't considered. They didn't know just how far the family would go to protect themselves. They didn't know that the Kias would fight with every ounce of strength they had, that they would not go quietly into the night. Taylor and Deli had no idea that their perfect plan, their perfect crime scene, was about to be torn apart. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought the Kias would bend to their will. They had no idea how far the family would go to protect themselves, to survive, to preserve their most precious memories. But the time was ticking. The family was getting closer, and the storm outside was growing stronger. As the robbers prepared for their attack, the Kias were already stepping into the trap they had set for them. And the moment they stepped through that door, their lives would be changed forever. They had no idea how far the family would go to protect themselves. Lena's mother turned pale, her breath coming in short gasps as she raised her hands in surrender. The second robber's eyes were cold, scanning her up and down with a look of disdain, as if he found her life to be nothing more than a trivial inconvenience. "What do you want?" Lena's mother asked, her voice trembling but strong. "What are you doing here?" She tried to keep calm, tried to think quickly, but the fear was creeping in, washing over her like a wave. The first robber spoke. His voice was low, guttural, carrying an undercurrent of authority. "We're just here for your stuff. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." But it was clear. This was no ordinary robbery. Their faces were emotionless. Their words were detached. Lena could feel it. The intent wasn't just to steal from them, it was to destroy, to break them down. The robbers weren't there to make a quick getaway. They were there to instill fear, to control the family in the most brutal way possible. Lena's mind raced as she took a step back, her thoughts a blur. What do we do? She could hear her father and younger sister coming in behind her. They would be walking right into this nightmare. They would be walking into the trap the robbers had set for them. And for the first time in her life, Lena felt truly powerless. Her mind flashed to the cabin door, to the snowmobiles outside, to the family waiting for them to return from the living room. But there was no escape. They were trapped. The robbers had them cornered. The plan was already in motion. The first robber moved forward, pushing Lena's mother into the living room. The second one followed, keeping a close watch on her, the gun raised, his eyes never leaving her. They didn't just want control. They wanted domination. Lena's body was shaking, but she had to think quickly. She had to keep her mother and sister safe. Her family wasn't going to just go down without a fight. They wouldn't let these men destroy them, even if they didn't know what to do next. This wasn't the Christmas they'd imagined. But this wasn't the end, either. This was just the beginning. But the most chilling part was yet to come. What the robbers did next would make this crime even more horrifying. As the cold, bitter wind continued to howl outside, inside the cabin, a surreal scene was unfolding, one that would forever be etched in the Kia family's memories. The robbers didn't rush. They didn't scream or shout orders. They didn't seem desperate for time. No, there was something far more sinister about the way they moved, something that made their every action feel even more chilling. Vaughn Taylor, the one with the gun, stood in the center of the room, his expression as cold as the mountain air outside. Ed Deli, the other robber, was pacing nearby, scanning the room, his gaze flicking from family member to family member as if he were inspecting an object, not a group of terrified people. Both men were dressed casually, as if they were just two ordinary guests who had shown up uninvited to a Christmas celebration. But there was nothing ordinary about them, nothing friendly. And as the tension in the room grew thicker, it became increasingly clear that these men weren't here for money or valuables. They were here for something much darker. They took their time. Too much time. Lena watched, horrified, as the two men casually began to tear into the Christmas presents. Gifts that had been carefully chosen, lovingly wrapped, and placed under the tree with such care. The wrapping paper flew into the air like confetti, only this wasn't a celebration. Taylor ripped open the first gift, throwing the box aside with a grunt, inspecting the contents with bored indifference. A sweater. He muttered something under his breath about it being too small, and tossed it aside as if it were nothing more than trash. Deli, not far behind, had opened a box of chocolates. He popped a piece into his mouth without hesitation, chewing slowly, his eyes still scanning the room, completely unaware, or perhaps just uncaring, of the fear gripping the family. It wasn't just a robbery. It was a mockery of everything the Kias held dear. The Christmas tree, the laughter, the love, it meant nothing to these men. They weren't robbers looking for money. They were destroyers, and the joy that the family had shared moments before was their target. The robbers moved methodically, like predators toying with their prey. They laughed, exchanged words, and continued opening more presents, acting as if they were the ones who belonged there. "Nice toys," Taylor remarked casually, glancing at the doll that had just been unwrapped, a gift for Lena's younger sister. He handled it like it was nothing, his fingers trailing over it absent-mindedly, as if inspecting an object at a yard sale. He picked up a small stuffed bear, shook it in the air, and laughed under his breath. "I guess you're too old for this, huh?" The comment hung in the air, its irony not lost on Lena, who had been dreaming of a peaceful, joyful Christmas with her family. Her sister, her mother, even her father, were frozen, utterly shocked by what they were seeing. The calm, warm feeling that had filled the cabin moments before was now replaced with something much darker, an unbearable tension that suffocated every breath they took. The robbers weren't just taking material things, they were taking memories. They were taking away the family's very sense of safety, their peace of mind, their sanctuary. Everything that had been so sacred to the Kias now lay shattered before them, treated as nothing more than disposable objects to these two men. As Deli moved toward the table where the Kias' carefully prepared Christmas dinner lay, he picked up a bottle of wine and sniffed it. "Not bad," he said, then took a swig, ignoring the fact that the family's holiday meal was meant to be shared among them, a symbol of their togetherness. He didn't care about any of it. He didn't care about their traditions, their love, their home. His only interest was in destroying it all. Through all of this, the Kia family was paralyzed, unable to process what was happening, unable to fully react. Lena's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might explode. Her mother, her usual calm and steady self, was standing still, her hands raised in surrender, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her father, usually a tower of strength, seemed to shrink into himself, each passing moment draining the color from his face. Their minds couldn't catch up with the horrific reality of the situation. Yet the robbers remained unmoved, unaffected by the terror they were causing. It was as if they didn't even see the fear in the Kia's eyes. It didn't matter to them. There was no joy in their actions. There was no excitement, no urgency. Just cold, methodical destruction. And that, in itself, was what made this so horrifying. The robbers weren't desperate. They weren't even angry. They were simply indifferent, detached from the human suffering they were inflicting. They treated the family not as people but as obstacles to be moved out of the way, their feelings, their safety, their lives irrelevant in the face of their own twisted desires. Taylor, after tearing through the final present, a pair of gloves, tossed the empty box to the side and sat down on the couch, as if he were settling in for a long stay. He kicked his boots off and stretched his legs out, as though this were just another day. Another holiday, perhaps, but with a much darker purpose. He didn't even look at the family anymore. They were irrelevant to him. The minutes stretched on, their silence filled only by the robbers' casual commentary and the soft sound of tearing paper. Deli picked up a stuffed animal and gave it a quick shake, making it squeak. "Well, this is fun," he muttered, the smile on his face unsettlingly casual, as if they were simply passing the time with a harmless prank. "Might as well enjoy it while it lasts, huh?" Lena, still standing frozen in place, watched her family break down before her eyes. Her mother's face was pale, her hands shaking, her body hunched as if she were trying to disappear. Her father's jaw was clenched, his fists tight at his sides, fighting back the urge to scream. Her sister stood next to her, eyes wide with fear, the childlike innocence of the holiday now shattered completely. And yet, the robbers remained calm, unhurried, and eerily in control of everything. It was as if they were saying, "This is ours now. This is what we want." They had already taken the family's holiday, their sense of safety, and now it seemed they were taking their humanity piece by piece, with every mocking gesture, every cruel laugh. As the seconds dragged on, Lena's mind was racing. She wanted to run, to scream, to do something to stop them. But she couldn't. She was paralyzed with fear. Every movement felt like it would make things worse. Every breath felt too loud. This wasn't a robbery. This was an execution, a total loss of everything she had known to be safe and secure. And just as she thought things couldn't get worse, just as she thought she had seen the depths of their cruelty, something unexpected happened that would change everything. As they mocked the family's holiday, something unexpected happened that would change everything. Lena stood frozen, her body rigid with terror, but her mind was racing, a blur of frantic thoughts. The room around her, once a place of warmth and joy, now felt suffocating. The robbers, Taylor and Ed Deli, were still rummaging through the family's Christmas gifts, as though they had all the time in the world. The casual cruelty in their actions was enough to make Lena's blood run cold. But her mind refused to stay idle for long. She had to think, how can we get out of here? Her first instinct was to run, to make a break for the door, to somehow escape into the snowstorm and disappear. But the snowmobiles were parked outside, and the robbers had already proven how easily they could control the situation. Lena's eyes darted from the robbers to her family, scanning their faces. Her mother, pale and trembling, stood silently by the fireplace, her hands raised in surrender. Her father, ever the protector, was doing his best to keep his composure, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were balled into fists at his sides, ready to fight if only the moment would come. And then there was her sister, her little sister, standing beside their mother, frozen in fear. Lena's heart ached for her. The innocence that should have filled the holiday season was now gone, replaced by the terrifying realization that they were at the mercy of two ruthless men. I can't let anything happen to her, Lena thought fiercely. I'll do whatever it takes. I have to protect her. But how? How could she protect her family when they were all trapped, held at gunpoint, and outnumbered? The sound of engines revving in the distance broke through her thoughts. The familiar hum of snowmobiles. Her heart skipped a beat. Dad and Sarah. They're here. She could feel the weight of the moment as the sound of the snowmobiles grew louder, closer. It was the signal they had been waiting for, the moment when the rest of the family would walk straight into the nightmare that had already begun. And then, just as the engines faded from a distant hum to a clear, unmistakable roar, the door to the cabin flew open with a force that shook the room. Her father, strong and steady as always, stepped through the threshold, followed by her younger sister, Sarah, still in her snow gear. For a split second, there was a flicker of relief in Lena's chest. They were here. They had made it. But that relief was short-lived. One of the robbers, Ed Deli, suddenly moved with lightning speed, a gun drawn and aimed at her father. Inside. Now, Deli barked, his voice low and menacing. Lena's father froze, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation in an instant. He was trying to make sense of the chaos, the danger, the uncertainty, but there was no time. He had no choice but to comply. Sarah, terrified and confused, was forced into the room next to her father, the gun trained on them both. For a moment, Lena thought she might scream. Her mind screamed in horror, in desperation. This can't be happening. Not now. Not to us. But her voice, her body, remained still. Frozen. Her protective instincts kicked in. She had to stay calm. She had to help. They had one chance. One chance to survive. The robbers didn't seem to care much for formalities. Taylor, who had been rifling through the gifts, turned toward her father and sister with a blank, bored expression on his face. "Nice to see you could join us," he said, as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. As if this were some kind of bizarre holiday gathering, not the violent takeover of a family's home. Lena's stomach churned. She could feel the blood pounding in her ears, her hands tingling with fear. What do we do now? The clock was ticking. The moment they had all been dreading had arrived. Her family was outnumbered. There was no way to escape. But then, something inside Lena snapped into focus. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, sharp and immediate. She wasn't going to let these men take everything from her. Not without a fight. Her father, ever the protector, held his ground. He exchanged a glance with Lena, his eyes locking with hers. She saw it then, the determination behind his gaze. He's thinking the same thing. He's planning something. Lena's heart pounded harder. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about protecting what mattered. It was about fighting back. "We don't have much time," Lena whispered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else, but her father seemed to hear. He gave the slightest nod, as if to say, "I know." His eyes flicked toward the window, where the snow was falling even more heavily now, but there was no chance of hiding in the storm. They were trapped in here. The family's only hope lay in how they handled the next few minutes. As the robbers' behavior grew more erratic, mocking them, laughing at their fear, it became clear that they were losing control of the situation. Taylor and Deli had anticipated a quiet, easy robbery, a swift escape. But something was changing. There was a subtle shift in the room, a rising sense of unease in the air. The family wasn't crumbling under pressure. They weren't begging for mercy. They were calculating, focused. Lena's mind was running 1,000 miles a minute. She knew she had to act, had to make a move before the robbers completely lost their patience. She scanned the room, looking for any possible way to turn the tide. The cabin was familiar, but it was still a prison, and her options were limited. But she could hear her father's calm voice in her mind, his lessons on thinking ahead, staying in control. "We need to get them outside. Get them away from the weapons." Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement. Deli, now irritated by the family's unyielding silence, gestured toward the door with his gun. "I said, inside," he snarled. He was beginning to lose his cool. Lena's heart raced as she made eye contact with her father. It was their moment. He was ready. He had to be. But just as the situation seemed to reach its boiling point, something unexpected happened. There was a sound outside, low at first, almost imperceptible under the howling wind. But it grew louder, unmistakable. the whirring sound of a snowmobile engine. The robbers' faces changed. Deli's eyes darted nervously toward the door, then back to the family. Taylor didn't flinch. He simply stared, as if trying to decide what to do next. The sound was growing closer. Was it someone coming to help? Lena thought. Please, let it be someone who can help us. But there was no time to think about that. Not now. The family was running out of options. What if this was their last chance? What if this was it? The Kias knew they had one chance to survive this nightmare. Every second mattered. Every decision, every movement, would either bring them closer to safety or seal their fate. The family knew they had one chance to survive. Would they make it? Or would the robbers succeed in destroying everything? The tense stillness in the cabin was broken only by the sound of snowflakes hitting the windows and the occasional crackle from the dying fire in the hearth. The robbers, Taylor and Ed Deli, had thought they were in control. After all, they had planned every detail of this heist to perfection. They had taken the Kia family hostage, dismantling everything they held dear, mocking their joy and their holiday spirit with each passing moment. The family was terrified. No one could deny that. But beneath the terror, something else was stirring, a quiet, unyielding resolve. The Kias were not going to give up. They had fought back when it seemed like there was no hope, their instincts kicking in, their bond as a family stronger than the fear threatening to overwhelm them. The robbers had underestimated that. They had underestimated the resilience of the people they'd taken hostage. They thought they were in control, but the tide was beginning to turn, slowly, subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. Lena watched as her parents exchanged a brief, silent glance. It was a look she had seen 1,000 times before, the look that told her everything would be okay, even when nothing seemed certain. Her father, a man of few words, was calm, his movements deliberate. Her mother, despite the fear in her eyes, was still trying to comfort her younger sister, Sarah. Every gesture, every breath, every second of silence was a calculated move in the mental chess game they were playing against the robbers. They were all waiting for the right moment. And then they heard it. It wasn't a sound Lena could immediately place, but it was enough to make her pause, to make her heartbeat stutter. It was distant at first, a faint hum in the background that seemed out of place against the quiet of the cabin. The robbers didn't seem to notice at first. They were too busy with their casual mockery, too consumed with making the family feel small, powerless. But then the sound grew louder, more distinct, impossible to ignore. The unmistakable roar of an engine. 2 snowmobiles, perhaps 3, cutting through the thick snowdrifts outside. The robbers' eyes shifted to the door, their faces momentarily distracted. Lena's heart skipped. Help? Could it be help? She dared not hope, but the thought flashed through her mind with an urgency she couldn't ignore. Taylor, the more composed of the two, narrowed his eyes toward the window. He had clearly heard the engines too. He looked back at Deli, but neither spoke. They knew what this meant. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't prepared for the arrival of law enforcement. And then it happened. The door to the cabin burst open with a force that sent a shock wave through the room. Several figures in heavy coats stormed in, weapons raised, eyes scanning the room with precision. Taylor and Deli were momentarily stunned, caught off guard. They had been so focused on controlling the Kias that they hadn't even realized the police were close. Too close, in fact. They hadn't prepared for this. Everyone on the ground. The voice was clear, authoritative, the sound of law enforcement taking charge of the situation. The robbers reacted too slowly. Taylor reached for his gun, but he was too late. A sharp voice commanded him to freeze, and a figure in uniform grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind his back before he could even aim. Deli, panicking, tried to make a break for it, but another officer was already there, tackling him to the ground, pinning him in a way that left him no choice but to surrender. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The cabin, once a place of terror, had suddenly become a scene of chaos. The robbers, who had been so sure of their control, were now completely disoriented. They had underestimated the Kia family. They had underestimated the sheer determination of people who refused to go down without a fight. Lena watched, heart pounding, as the officers moved in with military precision. One by one, they disarmed the robbers. Taylor, ever the opportunist, looked for a way out, his eyes flicking toward the door. But it was too late. He was surrounded. His cold expression, so steady just moments ago, had now turned to one of panic, his breath heavy and labored as he realized the fight was over. Deli, on the other hand, was trembling, his hands raised in surrender, his face drained of color. The robbers' arrogance had crumbled. They had thought they could control the situation, break the family's spirit, but it had all come undone in an instant. The law enforcement officers moved quickly, securing the robbers, placing them on their knees, their hands behind their heads, their faces pressed into the cold floor. There was no fight left in them now. No bravado. Just the harsh reality of their capture. Lena's mind was racing. It was over. The nightmare that had descended on them so suddenly, so violently, had come to an end. Her father, still standing, walked toward her, and for the first time since this ordeal had started, she saw the relief in his eyes, the faintest glimmer of hope that things might actually be okay. But that wasn't the end of the story. Not yet. As the robbers were led away, their cold, emotionless faces still locked in a kind of defiance, perhaps more from fear than anger, the weight of what had just happened began to settle in. The family was safe, but the journey was far from over. This wasn't just a robbery. This wasn't just about stolen gifts or broken traditions. This was about something much deeper, something far more sinister. The robbers had come to destroy everything the Kias held dear, and though they had failed in the end, there was something even darker waiting for them. The truth of their actions, the full extent of their cruelty, would soon be revealed. And as the Kias stood together, their hearts still pounding, they knew one thing for certain: the battle was far from over. The trial that was to come would expose the darkest parts of these men's souls, parts of themselves they had hidden even from the law. As the robbers were led away, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the snow outside, Lena couldn't help but wonder, what would happen now? What would come of these men? But what would come next, the trial, would expose the darkest parts of their souls. The quiet of the cabin was deafening after the police had come and gone, taking the robbers away in handcuffs, their harsh faces locked in grim resignation. It was hard to reconcile the normal, peaceful atmosphere of the cabin with the violence that had just taken place. What had once been a sanctuary, a place of joy and family warmth, now felt like a crime scene, a place where innocence had been brutally shattered. Lena stood at the window, looking out over the snow-covered mountains, her thoughts still a blur, her emotions locked in a storm of confusion and grief. It hadn't really hit her yet, the depth of what had happened. She couldn't process it all at once. There was just too much to take in. The family had been torn apart in a way they could never have prepared for. In a single moment, everything had changed. The police had done their job, securing the scene, gathering evidence, and collecting the pieces of the broken puzzle. They had worked tirelessly to put everything in order, to track the robbers' movements, to piece together their plan. The robbers, Taylor and Ed Deli, hadn't been smart enough to cover their tracks. In fact, they had made several critical mistakes, and those mistakes had led the police to them. It all started with the video footage. The police had found a camera inside the cabin, a video recorder left behind in the chaos. When they played it back, the footage was both chilling and surreal. It showed the two men, Taylor and Deli, rummaging through the family's Christmas gifts, casually tearing into them as though they were part of the family, their faces betraying no remorse, no hesitation. The footage was eerie, as if it were a dark parody of a Christmas celebration. The robbers opened presents, commenting on the items like they were inspecting merchandise at a store. They tore through the wrapping paper with cruel indifference, mocking the very things the family had once held dear. In one disturbing moment, Deli held up a stuffed bear, shaking it in the air as if presenting it for the family to see. He smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was cold, detached, like a man who had completely lost touch with humanity. Taylor, meanwhile, rifled through a box of chocolates, taking a bite as if he were sampling an appetizer, completely unfazed by the fear that was evident on the family's faces just out of the frame. The camera captured the moment in all its horror, the family's terror just barely visible, their helplessness palpable. It was a moment that would haunt the Kias forever. Their most intimate family celebration turned into a grotesque mockery by two men who didn't care about anything but their own twisted desires. The video was just one piece of evidence. But it was damning. It showed the robbers' total lack of remorse, their cold, calculating nature. And it was this very footage, this small piece of their plan, that ultimately helped law enforcement piece together the full scope of what had happened. The investigation into Taylor and Deli's backgrounds was thorough. The police traced their movements, discovered their prior convictions, and even connected them to several other robberies in the area. Taylor's history of aggravated burglary and Deli's background in arson showed a pattern of escalating violence. They were both products of a system that had failed them, but this crime, the brutality of it, was beyond what anyone had expected. But even as the law enforcement team pieced together their plan, the emotional toll on the family was only beginning to unfold. Lena's father, once the unshakable rock of their family, had trouble speaking. His quiet demeanor had always been a source of strength, but now he seemed hollow. He avoided eye contact, his face pale, and his movements slow, as though the weight of what had happened was too much for him to bear. Her mother, too, was changed. She tried to be strong, tried to put on a brave face for the family, but Lena could see the cracks in her resolve. Her mother, who had always been the first to comfort and reassure, now seemed fragile, as though the safety she had once provided had been stolen from her in an instant. It wasn't just the physical scars, the bruises and wounds inflicted during the robbery. It was the psychological scars. The family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Lena had seen fear before, but never like this. The rawness of it, the vulnerability in her family's eyes, was something she could never unsee. They were trying to rebuild, but it was impossible to escape what had happened. The cabin, once a symbol of warmth and love, now felt tainted. They had returned to it after the police had finished their investigation, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy, but every corner, every room held memories of the terror they had faced. The Christmas tree, the decorations, the gifts, all of it now felt like a cruel reminder of the night that had almost cost them everything. Lena found herself staring out the window late at night, her thoughts racing. She wanted to understand why. Why had they been targeted? Why had these men chosen them? But there were no answers. Not really. The robbers had been opportunistic, choosing an isolated cabin, waiting for the Kias to arrive. They had no personal vendetta. They didn't even know the family. It was simply the perfect setting for their crime. The robbers didn't care about the family's lives. They cared about control, about breaking people down. And in that moment, Lena realized something even more terrifying. The robbers' cruelty wasn't personal. It was just who they were. Their indifference to the Kia's suffering, their cold, casual treatment of the family's most sacred traditions, had nothing to do with the family itself. It had everything to do with the robbers' inability to see them as human. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation moved forward. The robbers were charged with multiple felonies, aggravated kidnapping, armed robbery, and murder, to name a few. But even as justice seemed to be moving along, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was lost. Something permanent had been taken from them. They had survived, but they would never be the same. No trial, no amount of justice, could change the fact that they had been violated in a way that went beyond any crime. They had been stripped of their innocence, and it wasn't something that could be given back. And then there would be the trial. A chance to see the robbers held accountable for their actions. But Lena couldn't help but wonder what it would reveal. What would they say in court? What would come out of the darkness, the hidden parts of their twisted minds? The family had survived the worst of it. They had made it through the robbery, the terror, the chaos. But now they would face the final test, the trial. The legal battle that would drag the details of that night into the open. The robbers would be exposed, but so would the family's pain. The trial would be a public reckoning, a moment that would force them all to relive the horrors they had faced. But Lena knew something. No matter what happened in the courtroom, no matter how much justice was served, the Kias would never be the same again. Their lives had been changed forever. But while justice was served in the court, the family would never be the same again. Their lives had been changed forever. The robbers, Taylor and Ed Deli, had set out on their mission with cold intent, driven by greed and an unrelenting desire to exert control over others. Their motives were simple, if not entirely devoid of malice. They wanted to steal, to destroy, to break the spirit of those they encountered. For them, the family was just another target, another opportunity to take what wasn't theirs. But what they failed to understand, what they never accounted for, was the strength of the human spirit. They underestimated the Kias. Throughout this harrowing ordeal, the robbers remained blind to something fundamental: the resilience that lies within a family when they are pushed to their limits. The Kias, though shaken, never broke. They faced down unimaginable terror with a determination to survive, to protect one another, and to rebuild their lives. They proved, in the most trying of circumstances, that even when everything seems lost, there is always a chance to rise from the ashes. While Taylor and Deli sought to rob the Kias of their possessions, their joy, and their sense of security, they could not rob them of their strength. The emotional scars would linger, no doubt, but the Kias were no longer just victims of a crime. They were survivors, and with that survival came the power to heal. It took time, of course. Time to process what had happened. Time to reclaim what had been stolen from them. But in the end, the family found a way to move forward, each of them drawing on the unspoken bond that had been tested but never broken. Through this, we are reminded of something profoundly human: the capacity to endure, to heal, and to emerge from darkness stronger than before. The journey wasn't easy, and it wasn't without pain, but in the end, the Kias proved that even in the face of terror, love and resilience could triumph. They rebuilt not just their cabin, but their sense of peace. And in the process, they rebuilt their lives. As we reflect on this story, we're left with one lingering question: how far can the justice system go in truly restoring what was taken? Was the punishment enough to repay the cruelty these two men inflicted on the Kias? Or is justice, at its core, more than just a verdict? More than just sentences handed down in a courtroom? Perhaps the real justice lies in the way the family found the strength to endure, an enduring strength that no criminal, no matter how cruel, can take away. So, what do you think? Were the robbers simply the product of their circumstances, or were they truly beyond redemption? Did the justice system do enough to hold them accountable for their actions? And what do you think justice truly means for those who are left behind, for the victims who must rebuild their lives after such a brutal crime? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story moving, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Vic's Veil of Justice, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Share your thoughts, engage in the discussion, and join us as we continue to bring you powerful true crime stories. Thank you for watching.